so close, quarantine. You can share from a distance, quarantine. Now we want to see each other. We'll have to stay in your quarantine space while we talk.
Welcome to episode 36 of Quarantine. You know, when we began this, we were kind of moving away from the beginning of the pandemic and asking how was it changing all of our various institutions. Now, several months into it, we're actually getting close to what may be the biggest event going on since this pandemic started, the election, which is suddenly transforming because there needs to be both a mail-in election and a real election, a difficult thing to pull off. We're in the middle of a world of disinformation. And the thing that really struck us in getting ready for this show is I talked to a lot of friends, particularly young people who are disaffected. And it's like, does it matter? Will I be heard? You know, the concerns of people who think the system's rigged. And yet at the same time, there's all this capacity that may not be working now because of the COVID economics that would be, in fact, very capable of working on things like registration, turnout, helping poll watch in local elections. That disparity difference struck us as something really interesting to work on. What is it that all of us can do to guarantee both a successful election and an inclusive one, especially in the face of partisanship that somehow would prefer not to count mail-in ballots or try to suppress voting? It's a really complex situation. And to dig into it today, we have three guests, but let's think of today also as almost like a workshop. How can we all work together in the coming weeks to get this stuff right? Let's welcome our co-host, Mickey McManus. Hey, Mick. How are you?
Hey, Pete. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, you know, at around 4 o'clock, sometimes your internet goes a little crazy. So that's why there's two of us hosts and one will work one out. We have three guests today. First, I want to bring on my friend, Nico Miley. Hello, Nico.
Oh, hey, pleasure to be here.
It is great to be here. You and I first met about 20 years ago in the 2000 election cycle when we came together to counter-program the regular conventions because they were borning and social media hadn't been born.
That's right. The two major party conventions were not really conventions. They were cocktail parties for major donors. And so we, with the leadership of Arianna Huffington, created two shadow conventions, shadowing both the Republican Democratic convention across the street. You could walk across the street and actually get a debate about policy.
And you also very early on led the digital effort for Howard Dean's presidential candidacy, which was kind of the beginning of social media and presidential politics.
Absolutely. I joined the Dean campaign very early and was there till the bitter end. You know, sold the furniture, vacuumed the office, gave the keys to the landlord. And it was an incredible, incredible experience. And I basically ever since have been working to make sure my obituary is not the man who invented candidate fundraising spam. So,
yeah. You've spent your career since then. You're at the Harvard Kennedy School. We're both part of USC's Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy. You've been digging deep into both political consulting and the world of information and disinformation. And one thing we really want to understand from you today are what are the dynamics that are going on now where people can get involved and be activists. We set this notion up that there's a lot of people who want to engage, but we've been so distracted by everything in COVID. How do we engage? And how do we decipher things and pick a true north? That's something we'd like to get into today. And joining us after that segment, I want to introduce Jim Glazer, who's going to be both with us and part of the audience. Jim, who we've had on the show before. Jim is a friend, organizes a large Burning Man camp, has been part of Occupy. And Jim, you have a whole community of people who aren't going to Burning Man this year who want to help. And the question you're asking is, how do we organize people And so we'll do a little workshop. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to. And then Nico, as we talked earlier, we'll bring Jim back and talk a little bit about what communities can do.
So yeah, great to be here and nice to meet you, Nico. Yeah, we do Burning Man, but I think on a larger level, it's community organizing in a lot of different ways. Yes, it's Burning Man, but it's also, you know, the Bernie Sanders crowd and activism in general, with for me, with an edge on environmentalism. And yes, there's a lot of people not going to Burning Man, but there's also a lot of people that I know that would be getting ready for GOTV drives and all those other things. And now it's all about virtual, it's all about digital. So how do we take these amazing people that are all around the country, organize them, create compelling content, and then flood the zone in places where it might actually help? So content and amplification we're very interested in.
We will get back to you in a little bit. Nico, let's start. How would you frame your greatest
Actually,
concern?
wait, Peter, real quick.
Yep.
Real quick,
Okay.
just we jump in with Nico. Two things I want to flag. One,
Yep.
originally we're going to have Katherine Gehl today, and she was going to talk about the work that she did with Michael Porter at the Harvard Business School on the politics industry and kind of looking at, if you looked at system level innovation and thought again fresh about how to maybe have a more just system and a system really citizen centered. Katherine wasn't able to make it today, but we're going to have her on a future show. I just want to make sure everyone knows that she's not going to show up all of a sudden because our time that she'd be here. The other one is I just wanted to point out, Mohib, can you bring up the whiteboard, my other screen? If you happen to be following along and you've been paying attention, we need to try to capture the content from the show, and we've been trying to do that on different days. Last week, different episodes. We had one on art, and if you were to wind back the clock, you'd see that we've kind of got a giant whiteboard for sort of every episode that we were able to pay attention to. I guess not every episode because we've been kind of inconsistent. But if you'd like to join on our main site, quarantine.today, you can see that there's a link that says Miro. You can click in there and you can actually come with your own comments. It's just a little board for us to cap it. So today I'll be capturing. We can throw that down again and take that off stage, and then we'll just jump in on Nico. And then, oh yeah, our third guest is going to be Adam Clayton Powell III, talking about election security. So a fellow with Peter at USC. Peter, do you want to say just a second or so about Adam, and then we'll jump in on Nico?
Yeah, Adam, who Nico and I both know from USC, has been leading a project in all 50 states with secretaries of state on how to run more secure elections. Now, you can imagine when this started 3 years ago, election security wasn't top of mind because we didn't realize how much we were hacked. Then after, we actually started 4 or 5 years ago, after the 2016 cycle, the state started realizing that you had cyber attacks going down to the state level. And when you have 10,000 local elections, it's asymmetric warfare. If the Chinese are targeting you and you're in a little place in North Dakota, well, how about that? So he has been working on that. And Nico, Adam points out something I think you're going to point out, that one of our greatest threats is disinformation. It's really expensive and difficult to hack voting machines when there's 10,000 districts, but it sure is easy to mess with people's minds and target disinformation. And so he's been working with secretaries of state on that. You know, and it's a pretty frightening story when you think about kind of the environment that we're in. So he's going to share with us that. And in a future episode, we're going to be joining him in an actual workshop where he teaches what this stuff looks like. So that's going to be pretty fun. Nico, over to you. What are your greatest concerns going into this cycle? And in the 3 months that we have, how can, you know, capable people who are in the audience who want to help, what should people be doing to help this democracy in the next 90 days?
Probably my greatest fear is that people won't participate. You know, there's so much anxiety already from the pandemic. People have so many crazy fears and concerns. And the reality is we are living in an unprecedented time and an unprecedented political system. I don't think anyone alive has experienced something like the current president, the current administration, the current political dynamic, or the pandemic and its impact. And so with all this uncertainty and all this stress, I'm worried people will shut down, tune out, be too freaked out to go vote or to otherwise participate in their democracy.
Right. So and I think we're beginning to see that now. People get so preoccupied, the normal organizing is going on, that the pre-election attention, things that run up to it, aren't great. And right, and then you have this whole issue about voting by mail and participation for that. What are the approaches that route around that? Do groups of friends and groups of community have to connect up? Where do we go?
Absolutely. Like, the thing about elections in the United States is they are remarkably, unfathomably local affairs. It is not uncommon for two municipalities next door to each other to have totally different ballots, right? That there's someone in your community who decides where you go to vote. And our communities are just, elections are really, really local. And it's important to understand that, because that means your participation is essential to the success and integrity of the election. Your participation, not only in terms of voting, but your participation maybe in terms of volunteering to work at the polls, or agreeing to be a poll watcher, or working with an organization you care about to evaluate the integrity of your polling space. There's just a huge amount of work that goes into elections. It's overwhelmingly done by volunteers in this country. It's also worth noting that most poll worker volunteers, polls are what we call, where you go to vote is the poll, right? And they're almost all staffed by volunteers. And those volunteers are, for the most part, elderly, retired people. And I think there's a real concern that we'll have a shortage of poll workers because of the health considerations of the pandemic. So, the number one thing you can do is really engage in your local community. Find out how you volunteer to be a poll worker. Find out what you can do with friends and family to get more people in your community to vote.
Nico, are there examples of initiatives going on in different parts of the country that are explicitly about swapping out young for old to kind of help in the volunteer front, in terms of making sure that we're not putting people that are elderly at risk? In other words, is there like a concerted best practices for this, or a way we should be thinking about this in terms of hey, this is working well, do this in your community?
Great question. A lot of this still happens at the local level. It's like the League of Women Voters for your community, or the PTA, or a lot of this really is very, very local. And I think, one of the things that's happening.
My mom, by the way, was an election official in Chicago, president of the PTA when I was a kid, and she was adamant that we understand it when we were in high school and grammar school, because she was a volunteer, and that was part of being a part of in the community.
One of the things I think has happened in America is we have gotten too focused on the national, on the big, right? Everyone's obsessed with the president and the national news. But what really matters for the health of our communities, and what really matters for the health of our democracy, is actually the local. It's embarrassing to me that local turnout, if there's no presidential election, it's just a local election, turnout is frequently single digits in municipalities across America. And in some sense, Trump is a symptom of that.
That's crazy, wow.
Right? The kind of extent to which people are just radically disengaged. To your question about poll workers, there is a lot of this, again, happens at the local level, but there are some national coalitions. One I'm involved with is the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. It is working to try and get college students to volunteer as poll workers.
Excellent. So that's slsvcoalition.org. Okay.
This episode actually started with a conversation that I was having with a friend who didn't want to participate. And I'm like, you're not working now. Every day you should get up and do the internet or be on the phone to register people or turn out the vote. And then I realized I wasn't exactly who we were supposed to contact to get that done. So I put a post on Facebook asking friends, and a bunch of ideas came back, including a blog post from you, Nico. So I want to talk about some specific things. So one point you made was to be very local. You were focusing on the National Conference of Citizenship and a group in Wisconsin that was focusing. So you were suggesting specific places that we go to. We got a number of emails back or text back. People were talking about Move On and Rock the Boat, and there's a postcard for voters. So maybe you could take us through a little bit of the kind of organizations that people could focus on, because it just seems like it's a good use of people's time right now.
Sure. The first thing I'll say is you should register to vote. You should organize your friends to register to vote. The easiest way to do that is a tool called turbovote.org. Turbovote.org is, I'm formerly the board chairman, but it's used by millions of voters every year to register to vote. There are states and municipalities where it is their chosen tool to register people to vote. It makes registering to vote as easy as watching Netflix. And you can sign up to get text message reminders about, don't forget to vote today, and here's where you can vote. And if your local municipality has early voting, it'll let you know that. It's just, I highly recommend you use turbovote.org it's free.
Are there like turbo vote? Are there turbo vote parties, like Netflix parties, or could it be tied with a Netflix party or something like that, or an Amazon party, how people are like doing viewing things? But could we just
go organize some?
Come on, let's do this.
Well, so I
like it.
Can I ask a question about that?
I see how that works, Nico. You just put that back on me. I get it.
Is who's registered
That's how
or not
this works.
Like,
that's how democracy works.
Is there a Facebook app that can query it and tell me if my friends are registered or not, so I can go beat up my friends who aren't registered?
I'm not aware of one. Although Facebook has been testing some code. I've seen some of it that plays with that themselves. I mean, Facebook has, it's so local, and we don't know what everyone's experience of Facebook is different. There's a lot of evidence that Facebook is driving people to register to vote.
Okay, keep going.
Another point I want to make is just you mentioned the National Conference on Citizenship. We're on super involved, former interim CEO and board member, and the National Conference of Citizenship really tries to connect local leaders around the country, so you can engage with organizations locally, and it just differs community to community. For example, in Philadelphia, one of the top organizations is called the Committee of 70. And it was founded over 100 years ago to be like 70 elders of the Philadelphia community to make sure people were active and engaged citizens. And every community is different. In your community, I said it might be the PTA, it might be the League of Women Voters, might be a church. There are churches that are definitely hubs, and synagogues, hubs for kind of civics and engagement. And the trick is to really go find locally in your community. Now, one organization that is in every community, but is not always as healthy as it could or should be, is actually the local Democratic Party or Republican Party. And so I highly recommend people engage with their local parties. It makes for much healthier democracy across the board. It is. I kind of feel like in America we've forgotten how to do politics with a small p, right? That in New England it used to be town meetings. You all got together in a big room and talked about what you were going to do, and we really have to get back to that, because what starts locally ends up bubbling up and giving integrity to the national. And so Peter, you mentioned Wisconsin, I was really encouraging people to get involved in Wisconsin, and specifically with the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, which is among the more vibrant, engaged, exciting state parties in the United States. But your state party, if it's not vibrant, you should go make it vibrant. There is a lot of work to be done to rebuild our parties so we can really have the kind of country we deserve.
I realized that my initial...
Nico, I've got a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
I was just saying, when I did my initial post, I realized it represented a bias of a thing to go do, which is I'm like, we better use our efforts here. I mean, I'm in San Francisco, so we know how it's going to go. How do we use our efforts here to register or turn out the vote in swing states or other communities where it's closer? Is that an important strategy, and how might people do that?
That's definitely an important strategy, but what's going to matter more in a swing state in Wisconsin or Michigan? You, a latte drinking, sushi eating, Birkenstock wearing, Volvo driving, Apple using, hipster, reel to reel cassette guy from San Francisco trying to tell someone in Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, how they should vote. No, it just, they got to hear from people in their communities. It's a really important thing for people to hear from their peers and other people in their community. One of the things we know for a fact is that the number one thing that gets people to turn out to vote is the idea that their neighbors are voting. Really interesting work done on this, where a number of academic studies where they'll send in fact, I believe, oh geez, I can't remember which advocacy group this was. It was either the Sierra Club or Planned Parenthood, maybe it was Move On, did a giant test with direct mail, sending lots and lots of households, postcards or literature, trying to figure out what issues made people vote. And then they sent a postcard that said, 5 of the 10 homes on your block voted, but you did not. And that one outperformed everything else, right? The social pressure technique. And so, I think the reality is that if you live in a place like San Francisco, which is not, frankly, going to be very heavily contested this time, the best thing you can do for swing states is to give money to local organizations in those swing states, specifically the local parties, and put your time and energy into your own community. Because one of the reasons that we don't have the Congress we should have, that we don't have the courts we should have, that we don't have the state legislatures we should have, is that people are just not involved enough in their own communities.
Nico, you had a crazy comment. I mean, or a fascinating comment that I want to dig into because it bothered me. But you said there was some very surprisingly high percentage of local of states that do not send a local news reporter to see what their congressman or congresswoman are actually doing. And could you tell us the difference between, say, 20, 30, whatever years ago and today? And maybe that starts to move us towards the kind of the information challenge.
Absolutely.
It's funny because your social comparison challenge is a behavioral economic hack, right? A nudge. And unfortunately, it feels like that's been weaponized pretty dramatically on the negative side. In other words, make us feel like we should just sit on our couch and be slacktivists, or make us feel overwhelmed so that we don't even go vote. What's the point? So it seems like it's been weaponized in that way. But talk to us about this local reporting back on what your congressman that you elected or congresswoman that you elected is doing out there, and how that has changed in the last few decades.
So the part of the problem, when I say America's gone like too big and too national, it's not just our politics, it's also our news. It used to be that most communities in America, even small ones, had a local newspaper. Maybe it was only once a week. Maybe it was every day. Some big cities had multiple newspapers that publish in the morning and in the evening. And so we used to have really kind of vibrant, you might say, information ecosystems around the country. Not just vibrant, but they had integrity. They very painstakingly, over about 60 years, built norms and professionalism around integrity and accuracy in reporting. And some of that was actually even mandated by law at one point, the Fairness Doctrine. And so we had this kind of healthy, vibrant ecosystem and information ecosystem that even got down very local. And that's almost all evaporated in the last 15 years. To give you an idea, about 15 years ago, commercial local news was about a $60 billion industry. Today, it's probably more like a 10, maybe even $8 billion industry. We've had hundreds and hundreds of local newspapers close in the last 15 years. There's you can go to newsdeserts.org and learn about that. And more or less, if you live outside the 5 biggest cities in America, you probably don't have any news. I live in a very affluent suburb of Boston. We used to have a weekly newspaper with 6 reporters, and now we have nothing. Who's building that lot on the corner? What's happening over there? What are our schools going to go back virtually or in person with the pandemic? We don't know. There's no local reporting, and that has a number of cascade effects. One effect that's pretty well documented is in municipalities without newspapers pay up between 5 to 9 basis points, additional basis points in municipal bonds, because there's an expectation of corruption in the marketplace, because there's no news to hold the local office holders accountable. Another example is a real increase in disinformation and partisanship. What I had said to you earlier, Mickey, was that a Pew study from 2015 showed that there were 21 U.S. states that used to send a correspondent to Washington, D.C. 10, 15 years ago that no longer do. And so just think about that. That's 42 U.S. senators who can spend 7 years in Washington, D.C. and never get a question from never run into a local journalist from their community in the halls of the Capitol or the press halls.
That just seems chilly, and
that's also 24 U.S. states where the only information they have, what does the relief bill mean for businesses in my community? What does the healthcare bill mean for our hospitals? What does the infrastructure bill mean for our roads? Nothing. You have cable news and talk radio and Facebook. And I think it's been really catastrophic for the democracy. And I really think one thing that would be excellent is to start more kind of local news. More philanthropic dollars go to the ballet in the United States than to local news.
By the way, here in San Francisco,
well, and recently we had Greg Foreman on, the CEO of McClatchy's, and now McClatchy's, which is a wonderful local news organization across the country, in Seattle, Mariner, Kansas City Star, et cetera. They just are coming out of bankruptcy, and part of the deal is they've had to sell themselves to one of their investors, just in the last few weeks. And so it is just a really a slow burning, over decades. But now it's like, wake up. And what do we do about this?
The thing I noticed.
Sorry,
recently,
Peter. Back to you.
Yeah, the thing I noticed, given the demise of large local news organizations, like McClatchy and Tribune and such, in my feed one day came something from Mission Local. Mission Local is a local online news organization that's really, it's focusing and looking at who's looking at zoning things, what are ordinances. And it occurred to me, kind of Nico's point, that would be a pretty good thing to support, because I didn't even realize that there were these organic, local, it's a nonprofit, but it didn't wait for ProPublica, it just organized itself. So I guess one question, Nico, is this a vibrant movement? Even as we're seeing large legacy news organizations go away, are people trying to form and create these local things that we can find and support? Is that a movement or not yet?
It is not quite a movement yet. It just started to happen. I can share a link from INN about how you start up your own local news nonprofit. I can also, there's
that's the learn.inn. Mohib, can we bring that up?
And there's also something called the American Journalism Project, which is an incubator, kind of in a Y Combinator style for local nonprofit journalism. But it's still pretty nascent. And the reality is there's not enough journalists. There's not enough local news entrepreneurs, because let's face it, local news is not that lucrative, although you can make a decent living. Nor is it that exciting. It's never going to be a household name nationally. but it's super important. It's super essential to our work, to our country.
Yeah.
Nico, I'm
And-
curious, if we were to compare ourselves to other democracies or other countries, have they suffered the same dramatic drop-off of local reporting, local news, local holding their ministers or senators, et cetera, corollary to the fire? Or has it been a uniquely an American collapse?
Well, it varies a little bit. For the most part, print advertising has subsidized pretty much all the news in the world. And the collapse of the business model of print advertising has put pressure on all commercial news. Two big caveats. The first is that in most other democracies, they have an infinitely better funded, like order of magnitude more public money goes to public media. And so the best example of that, of course, is the BBC. I think the BBC is like $83 or $84 per capita. In the United States, despite we call it national public radio and public television, somewhere less than 10% of the money is public funds. Most of the money is philanthropic. I mean, I think we're at like $2 or $3.
What does that come out to in terms of per capita? Okay.
It's about $2 or $3 a head, and that includes like Sesame Street. That's not just news. Okay. But most other
get what we pay for, I guess.
Most other democracies have much more healthy and robust public media, and that appears to have that appears to be like a rising tide lifts all boats. That appears to create greater demand for quality news. The other thing, not every country, but a lot of countries have, especially in places like the UK and France and Italy, is a tradition of partisan news, but partisan news with real integrity. Which, we have partisan news with Fox, but there's no integrity to the reporting. The president lies nearly daily on Fox News and is never asked a question or held accountable for it. And even though in Europe and in other countries there is a tradition of partisan news, it has a lot more integrity and greater values in reporting. One kind of interesting story about this is the story of Henry Luce, right? Henry Luce was the publisher of Time and Life magazine. He was enormously wealthy, enormously influential. At his peak, almost every American household got one of his publications, and he was very, very conservative. And he thought FDR was a commie pinko liberal destroying America and apple pie. And he wanted to go to war with FDR in the pages of his magazines. But he just watched Hitler destroy the Jews in Europe using, in a large part, newspapers, magazines, and radio. So he was a little nervous about this. So he gives his friend Robert Hutchins, the president of the University of Chicago and a tremendously respected public intellectual, he gives him $200,000 and says, go tell me where the line in the sand is. Go tell me what I'm allowed to do. And so Hutchins has the Hutchins Commission on the freedom of the press, and they have hearings, and they finally issue, incidentally, a poet on the commission, Archibald MacLeish, and they eventually issue the Hutchins report. And the Hutchins report says, oh, you got to be careful. Your company, like commercial news, has the power to shape public opinion. And because it has the power to shape public opinion, it has special responsibilities to the democracy that other corporations, private companies do not have. And I try and imagine today Rupert Murdoch or Mark Zuckerberg saying, I wonder if this is healthy for the democracy. And Henry Luce hated the Hutchins Commission, said it was some of the worst money he ever spent. But he lived by it. He abided by it. He did not go to war using his publications. It's really quite a story for our time.
That is an amazing act of integrity and morality. And Hutchins keeps coming up. We did a couple of shows with folks from the Aspen Institute, because it was Hutchins and Mortimer Adler who teamed up on the great books and kind of what are the fundamental tenets that we would put a democracy together with. And we're going to come back to that stuff. It is great to uncover these great influences in our past. I want to bring Jim Glazer in at this point because we've kind of set the table here. We've talked about things are local, the importance of news. We've talked about what it's like for a latte-ish person to go after somebody who's sitting there in southern Wisconsin. And Jim here, who is a dear friend and an activist. And Jim, you're plugged into some of the best content creators that there are. And you're sitting there kind of asking, how can me and my communities and the communities that I touch, how can we make a difference? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you have in mind and kind of this conversation, kind of what you're thinking of. And I'd love to have a conversation between you and Nico to kind of think through, how do you direct your communities in the coming 90 days for a healthier democracy?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, it's I'm very gratified to hear the conversation about state and local, because what we're up to isn't just about the next 90 days. Quite frankly, we've needed a shakeup for a long time. The framework that Koch brothers and others on the right put together over the years have really dragged down our democracy and quite frankly, dragged down the Republican Party with it. There's no longer stands for anything other than, it seems, funneling wealth to their donors. So how do we fight back? And yes, with a lot of news sources turning into entertainment TV, really the content it's about neighbors sharing with neighbors. This sort of, yes, we're looking at national strategies, but then I'm very excited to talk more about how you get into local strategies and do the hard work of democracy, getting people educated in civics again, which also fell off the radar at some point along the way. But once again, my professional background is executive recruiting, so I've always been mixing my day job of recruiting powerful people, smart people, people with specific skills, with my passion of community organizing, very much for art and culture, but also for activism. So now we find ourselves in a situation where we have this incredibly deep creative community that everybody's brains are whirring and they're complaining on Facebook and etc. So we have a creative well, and then we have all these tentacles because several of our movements are national. How do we sort of document our, what I'm calling red state allies or swing district allies? Not necessarily friends who are there, but maybe friends who have families there, so that we can help take content that some of our people are creating, or even just other content that's not getting the right airplay, and then flood the zone with in a way that will be memorable, that just won't fly by like everything else that happens in our society these days.
Is that a strategy, Nico? You can see what he's trying to do, which is amass content people, put it in a local context, and yet you've put on the table a number of the issues here. Kind of how do you approach kind of what Jim has in mind, or what guidance might you give, kind of given what you see in the real politics of it all?
Absolutely, it's a great strategy. I mean, look, this is like exciting. People, you can organize online, you can do all kinds of things to engage your communities, you can create content like this. There's a huge amount of work to be done, and I think the important part is to keep it very real, keep it relational, keep it local, keep it community oriented. And Jim was talking about finding friends and family in swing states. That's perfect. That's good. That's relational, because the people are not easily swayed by strangers for the most part, especially on the internet. It's like, since when did you listen to some stranger who replies to your tweet, right, and tells you you're wrong? But friendships and relationships really matter, and they are the heart and soul of politics, always have been. And so keeping that in mind when you looking for ways to be active and involved in this election. It's like, I also like something Jim said, which is that he's really, they're thinking well beyond this election, that this is about really fundamentally getting people re-engaged in the American political process, starting at the local level.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Hey, Jim, I had a comment or a reaction that I wanted to first, for those viewers who are joining us and haven't seen Jim on a past episode, Jim, can you give us a little bit of your background, with Costume Cult, because that was possibly one of my favorite places to visit at Burning Man, but also the exuberance. When you say creative content, you're actually talking about like kind of epic different ways of looking at the world. And then you also are, you were there with Occupy Wall Street. You were like, you're out there with a sign pretty regularly, and so can you give us a little bit of that background about when you say creative content and creating a content army to help not just for this election, but to like kind of reinvest, what comes to mind with you, or give us a little more of that background and what you're envisioning?
So in terms of content, yes, the Burning Man community is very creative, but I also have done a lot of work with marketing organizations and advertising. So people that are really good at branding a thing. And when you think about what the Republicans have done much better, in my opinion, than the Democrats, it really kind of started with swift voting, where they took advantage of poor John Kerry and made him look like a traitor while George Bush was the draft dodger. So they've been doing this thing called truth flipping for the longest time, where they know they have a problem and they get out ahead of it and they blame the Democrats for it. And the Democrats never fight back because they're so deep in nuance, right? Oh, it's 12 things, and then nobody hears them because they don't know how to punch back. And then the Republicans also drive the news cycles because they're so good at the punchline and the headlines that even liberal media just eats up the Republican talking points, and then that sucks up the oxygen from while they steal the money out the back door. So how do we drive news cycles again? We're supposed to be the creative side.
You're probably a Democrat, Jim. Just I'm guessing this. From subtle comments. But I just said I'm going to guess that you're a Democrat. I'm just going to try to, or at least on that side, not the Republican. But yeah, so the idea here is that up the game in terms of creative content, take advantage of the storytelling power that creatives in agencies, creatives in other kinds of groups can bring. But I imagine that you said we need to reinvest in civics. We don't want just another arms race. Who's better at wagging the dog, right? So what is the way that we do this that is that it actually contributes back to maybe what Nico harkens to, which was from the birth of our country, we were actually pretty damn partisan, but partisan with ethics. And it was a knife fight out on the streets from the beginning of the birth of this country. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but how do we actually raise the bar here? How do we actually make this something that people feel that it's not just tit for tat, or that it's not just an arms race? I am just curious. I don't know the answer.
So there's several categories of content, and one of the things I'd like to ask about is what what the data is saying, or what are the issues that really could change hearts and minds. But more broadly, education around the things that are not being taught in school or taught as part of our discourse, where it's all about whatever the big issue is that day. So right now, how to vote, where to vote, how to know if you've been knocked off the voter rolls, etc. There's just so many things that may not be getting through, and so just very specific educational things. And then moving forward, I mean, apparently Gen Z, one of the things we're hearing is they don't even know how to mail things because they haven't really ever had to mail anything. So there's some very specific educational content that would, of course, be better if we did it in a very creative, funny, interesting way.
The way you're positioning yourself here is you're saying we have a capable group of creatives, a virtual agency, if you will, and we'd like some direction from the client. The client would be, in this case, someone who understands what works civically or politically to understand where to put our attentions, right? And some of it's educational, are we helping people register? Are we showing them polling places? Are we stirring up why you should behave locally? And some of it's partisan. When you talk about framing, this is a little bit about what George Lakoff talks about, which is perhaps the progressive side that is so wonky gets caught up in things and doesn't crisp it up the way that the right, with things like right to life, creates a meme. And I think the progressive side is like, hey, we're not as good at memes. So, Nico, I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two things. And I'll add one other question. the Lincoln Project has shown up as a bunch of Republicans taking on Republicans. And in addition to the fact that they're just doing a lot of clever stuff, they appear to have a little bit of people who understand a point of view sympathetically speaking to that point of view. Do you see that going on, or is that just some of the other side looking in? So I'd love your thoughts on them, and then more broadly.
I think the Lincoln Project only matters if you're a liberal on Twitter. I think it has almost no impact whatsoever. Jim said something really essential here. The Republicans are excellent storytellers. They craft these big meta narratives that they hammer away at again and again. When Bill Barr was testifying in front of Congress last week, Jim Jordan, the ranking member on the House committee, opened with a 10-minute video montage of violence in American cities. Almost all, incidentally, the clips appeared to feature Black people committing that violence. And they just hammered away at it in every available channel. There is violence in the cities, and people of color are perpetuating it. And this becomes like, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe. And if you watch the whole hearing, you heard every Republican member of Congress ask questions about safety, security, criminals, violence in the streets. And the Democrats were all over the map. They covered like the entire ocean. And so
it's sort of the big tent thing versus the single-minded, broadcast.
So what the Republicans are excellent at, what the Republicans are excellent at is a serialized narrative that kind of has these meta overarching themes that they repeat and hammer away at. And then they have an entire media infrastructure online to spread and amplify those narratives. And then they have Fox News, which picks them up and broadcasts them. And then the Washington Post and CNN and New York Times feel compelled to respond to the media, to the Fox News narrative. And it creates a tremendous amplification. And a perfect case study in this is the idea that came out the month before the midterms, that there was a caravan of immigrants moving towards the border. There was no caravan, totally false, but plays into a meta narrative that you're not safe and they're coming to get you, right? And they're going to take away your jobs. And this idea of the caravan begins to circulate on different kind of right-wing sites, Breitbart, etc., shows up on social media, gets retweeted by the President of the United States, gets covered relentlessly by Fox News, and then you have CNN starting to use the word caravan. And there's something in misinformation studies that's called the Familiarity Effect. Mm-hmm. If I say to you, Barack Obama is a Muslim is false, you're familiarizing the idea that Barack Obama might be a Muslim. And it takes purchase in your brain. The brain likes these kinds of simple, somewhat crazy formulations. And the more often you hear it, even if it's in the context of debunking it, the more you're actually validating it. And so Trump understands this very well and manipulates the mainstream media within an inch of its life to perpetuate certain kind of ideas and narratives.
Absolutely, that really is the whole thing. How good they are at messaging, and while I don't think the left will ever get as focused because there are a lot more things to cover in the world than imaginary caravans. It is per Peter's comment, listening to the client, which in our case is the data. So, where's the swing state? What issues are trending? And what do the people in the Fox News bubble not know about that if we could help break through the Fox News bubble, it might, we're not going to get the MAGA hat wearing guy. We're going to get maybe the wife or the daughter or somebody that just doesn't know any better. So how do we break through the Fox News bubble and educate on the real facts out there?
What's fascinating about this, it really does get to how you do narrative and storytelling. And it's interesting that it's partisan, but it also shows that there's a group out there that somehow in a distributed way knows how to snap to a narrative and share it among itself very quickly, right? Someone comes up with a caravan, and the whole party kind of gets it, knows how to reinforce it. And on the other side, people are so interested in a lot of things, it doesn't happen. That's just an interesting way of how swarm ideas come together or not. Here's
And
what I'd like to suggest.
Just a quick question about that. How do they do it?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Who
heard
comes
it's
up with this shit, and how does it work?
It's like a fax from the Heritage Foundation every morning, and then they all like huddle, and they all come out of that room. And I tried to teach this to the Occupy Wall Street people, and I was like, can we come up with an issue a day and talk about it? And then they waited for me to shut up, and then they said something different, and around the room it went. So how do they stay on point so well?
How do they stay on point so well?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not as coordinated as you think, and it has a lot to do with actually casual social networks. Famously, for many, many years, Grover Norquist, the conservative activist, hosted a Wednesday morning coffee. We're just invited all the conservative activists to coffee in DC on Wednesday morning. And so they create kind of an ad hoc community. It's not like there are talking points that go out, but they have like a sealed off narrative media life, and they listen to each other and pick the best stuff. And some of them are very talented at amplifying and crafting these narratives.
Nico,
There's also just a lot more infrastructure. We don't have a Fox News. We don't really even have a Breitbart. We don't even have a billionaire pouring money to create a Breitbart as the right did. I mean, we're just missing some of the,
I would also say,
pieces.
Nico, to your point about the infrastructure, just to add on that, way back when Obama was a candidate, and even back to Al Gore, I remember visiting evangelical churches, so in the African American community, on every Sunday, and you could have tuned into talk radio, tuned into the minister at the church, tuned into Fox News. You'd hear the same adjectives and the same exact words, and it was talking points that went out to all the spiritual leaders. And these might be spiritual leaders in, again, African American evangelical churches. This is in Chicago, but I also saw it in some other places. That it's probably not in their best interest to support Bush or support, the Republican, but because of the single issue, maybe it's the right to life. They're literally telling us the same talking points. So there's an infrastructure too that I don't know that we necessarily tap into too, which is the spiritual life of America, and whatever that translates into for the richness that America should be in terms of the sort of what ought we should do versus what we can do, and the whole moral side of things.
We are about to go to our.
It's a very powerful tool that's been weaponized.
We're about to go to our next segment with Adam Powell. But Nico, I want to bring up one final point here before we go, and we'll all come back afterwards if everybody's around. When you and I did the shadow conventions 20 years ago, and you may remember we brought a number of groups in, Common Cause and Jim Wallace, and we had entertainers, and we took over space in Philadelphia and LA. We tried to create a sense of a coherent programming that we could counter program. But I did remember that when you put a whole bunch of progressive people together for a few days, they all tried to take the air in the room and take up every available moment so that people couldn't even take a bathroom break. And our ability to coherently put it together, I found difficult. It was the first time I noticed all of that. And I think that appears to be some of the dynamic we're talking about now.
Although I think the shadow convention is worth noting that one of the ways we tried to bring coherence to it is each day had an issue focus. And I want to bring up the issues because this is from 2000.
Yeah.
The first day was the war on drugs and how screwed up it is and how it's leading to mass incarceration of black men. The second day was on income inequality and how it was skyrocketing. And the third day was on campaign finance reform and the role of money in politics. And those are arguably still today the three biggest public policy issues of our time. And in 2000, no one wanted to talk about them in the major parties.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So
like I said, that just gives a narrative framework.
Yeah.
Now it's still, you're right, really hard to keep people corralled inside that narrative framework.
Okay, well, we could go on and on about that. Let's do the following. I want to take us into our next segment with our friend Adam Clayton Powell III, who has been leading an election security effort out of USC. And as you can imagine, when this started several years ago, it was not such a big issue. And Adam has been in there in 50 states and is sharing with us some pretty interesting things when you have 50 states realizing that they're the recipient of an attack vector coming from outside the country and within. So let's take a look at that. This will go for about a half an hour, and I invite both of you to stick around if you have time, and we can have a conversation later. And if not, no problem at all. So thank you very much, Nico. We're going to continue these conversations. Great getting back in touch. And Jim, it's always great to see you, and you have been, you know, kind of a representative here for the capacity of people who want to go to work on civic matters. We will come back in a little bit. And Mohib, now let's go off to our friend Adam Powell and election security. With Adam Powell, who leads the USC Election Security Project. Adam, we're both senior fellows at USC's Annenberg Center for Communications Leadership and Policy. And when you started an election security project with Google a couple of years ago, I don't think a lot of Americans thought it would be such a center stage problem in our democracy. So tell us a little bit about the project and what this journey has been like and what you're looking at.
This actually goes back to 2015, when very few people were thinking that election security is going to be a problem. And people used to just show up on election day and vote and think not much more about it. And in fact, the election director in New Jersey, Bob Giles, has a wonderful line. He says, you know, we're like Santa Claus. We show up once a year, but we spend the rest of the year getting ready. Well, now we know about getting ready, because this year has been such an extraordinary change and such an extraordinary challenge for running our elections. But to give us some historical perspective, back in 2015, we were doing a project on mobile phones and public service. And one of the people in the room who came to all of our meetings was Vint Cerf, who co-invented the internet. Now he's a senior VP, I guess, at Google. And Vint said, "Why are we talking about mobile phones?" And we looked at each other and said, "Well, that's the purpose of this project." And he said, "But you can buy a coffee maker now with an IP address. You can get anything connected to the internet. Don't you want to talk about the security of everything connected to the internet?" Everyone around the table looked. Not a bad idea. And so he said, "Good. Let's talk about the Internet of Things and the security of connected devices." Well, that was a pretty broad mandate. But later that year, the National Governors Association approached us and said, "Will you be our cybersecurity university partner or research partner?" Because by then I'd met with people in the federal government, then Chair Mike McCall, House Homeland Security Committee, then Chair Lamar Smith of the House Science, Technology, and Space Committee, people on the Senate side. And it was quite an eye-opener, because everybody, in fact, I remember Mike McCall looking at me saying, "Help us." I'm thinking, me? But it was early enough that it really wasn't very much the center of public concern. But people in the intelligence community were beginning to see some really troubling signs. So we advanced to the 2016 election. We saw what happened with the DNC. We saw other things that happened. And then suddenly, much more attention was being paid to election cybersecurity. And we, working with the National Governors Association, we did programs at their summer and winter meetings of governors. We did some off-the-record private cybersecurity programs with selected states that approached us for help. And then last fall, we suddenly had the resources, courtesy of our friends at Google, to do all 50 states, something we had never dreamed possible. And so we set off, and now we've done 38 states. We will finish state number 50 early in October. We're going to come back and do California again. We'd always planned to do California twice, because California is so large. And then we'll do something before the election that will be basically lessons learned and the latest information for everybody about election cybersecurity for our intended audience is campaign and election officials around the country. But it's really, as one person said, it's really everybody's concern. Everybody has to worry about this.
Adam, Adam, when you talk to governors initially about this, are they imagining cybersecurity is somebody who is getting in and changing voting results, or is it disinformation? Where do you start seeing the attack vectors or the things that have to get protected or looked at or even understood?
Great question, because back in 2016, 2017, the biggest worry was that somehow Russia or China or Iran or some bad actor would be able to change vote totals. Well, it turns out that's pretty hard to do. And one reason is that the United States is so decentralized. We don't really have a national election. In November, we're going to have about, well, on the order of 10,000 local elections, then we add them up. So the challenge of trying to change all those vote totals, it's almost impossible. Instead, Homeland Security folks have a great term. They say, what's the return on investment for bad actors? Trying to change vote totals, not a big return on investment. Trying to spread confusion, trying to discredit the result, that's where your return on investment comes down. So what we're seeing this year, different from 2018, different from 2016, a lot of bad actors have watched Russia very carefully, and they're following Russia's R&D examples. So you have Russia, Iran, China, to a lesser extent, North Korea. The last number I saw was that there are 70 countries hacking into the United States. And yes, and many.
What you're describing are these are the classic disinformation hacks, right? The same kind of stuff that Cambridge Analytica was good at: create groups, get followers. Now you can't distinguish between actual activist groups and infiltrating activist groups, and then no one knows what to believe in. And then if the president comes in and says you can't believe in this election, there's a lot of supporting evidence, and suddenly the foundation of the democracy is less foundational. So it's that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing is that with Russia taking the lead, democracies all over the world are being attacked. And so last year, a number of observers went to Indonesia to watch their election very carefully, because somebody said Indonesia is going to be the rehearsal. India is going to be the dress rehearsal. Ukraine is going to really be the show. And we're going to see the kinds of things that are coming after us. I mean, July 30th, I think it was Macedonia, where we saw some of the latest techniques. Just to show you how it's changing. This year, Russia is focusing on two new methods of attack. One is called what they call franchising, meaning they will actually pay Americans to post Russian propaganda. It's coming from inside the United States, which changes the whole legal defense framework. It changes how the federal and state governments view this. The other thing they're doing is...
When the people are paid, do they know they're being hired by a foreign agent, or do they just know they're getting hired to say certain things?
Usually the latter. I mean, there are not that many Americans who will knowingly be foreign agents.
They think they're being hired as internet influencers, and how cool is that?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And instead what they're doing is spreading confusion, and sometimes it's at a very, very local level. I mean, the governor of North Dakota said, we're talking about people trying to infiltrate and confuse a 200-person school district. What's the return on that? And he said, well, think about who those kids are. If they can get into those kids' laptop computers with information and attack vectors, those kids' parents are the people who run the Minuteman missile base there. So suddenly you're seeing all of these different ways of attacking the United States, and the COVID-19 virus has taken this to a whole new level. I mean, even back at the beginning of March, we thought we knew what the situation would be. By the middle of March, when USC and many other institutions shut down travel and meetings, we began to see a change, because suddenly people are working at home. They're not working on secure equipment. So now you can have a much greater opportunity for bad actors of all kinds to come in and do things to disrupt elections. In fact, when we did the New Mexico state program yesterday, their Secretary of State, most of our programs are opened by the Secretary of State or Attorney General or some statewide official who is in charge of election security. And everybody now is bragging about how low tech they are. That we use paper ballots. We put the paper ballots in a safe. When it's tabulated statewide, the statewide tabulating equipment has no connection whatsoever to the internet. Because once it's connected to the internet, you're introducing the possibility of interfering in statewide returns. But the whole point, as you point out, the whole point of this is how do you not just disrupt, lower confidence in the results, so that whoever wins the election will have that much less credibility.
You've been running a program with 50 states, and I listened to this problem. I'm like, this is almost a national intelligence level problem, right? You've got foreign stuff coming in. You'd want to work with Google or Facebook, or you'd want to be running a fair amount of machine learning to see what's going on. What do you do when you work with 50 states? Because they know how to secure their balloting, but so give me a sense for what you're teaching them, how alarmed they are, and the response that we're seeing. How prepared are we?
Well, there's a truism that the 50 states are all different. They are very, very different. And we've seen, I guess, at one end of the scale, New Hampshire, which is all paper, and in fact, they have armed law enforcement officers who take the results from each of the precincts and they drive to a central place. So that's how they do it, very old school. But then some of the more advanced states, I mean, including California and New York. I mean, look at New York. They had a primary election on June 23rd, I think it was, and the end of July they still hadn't finished counting the votes. That's crazy, and that's something which we're probably going to be facing in November. There are an awful lot of places that are going to take a long time to count the votes.
Because of mail-in?
Mail-in is a big issue, but in Georgia it was also new software that caused problems because they hadn't had adequate training. But mail-in is the big change, because since the middle of March, since the virus, since the pandemic, suddenly we're seeing this big flip. Nebraska went from 25% mail-in to 75% mail-in in 60 some odd days. They're very proud of the fact they were able to cope, and other states are now trying to take notes. How did Nebraska pull this off so smoothly? But suddenly going to mail-in, and that has become, as you know, incredibly polarized now. I mean, Democrats say mail-in is perfect, Republicans say mail-in is terrible. Maybe it's an accident, but I don't think so, that Trump wins 2-1 among people who are voting in person, and Biden wins 2-1 with people mailing in. So the parties have an interest in how people vote. But what we're finding in the states is actually less of polarization, because whether it's governors, lieutenant governors, secretaries of state, attorneys general, they are faced with a task of, how do I solve this? I actually spent a half hour on the phone with a secretary of state, I probably shouldn't say which state, where they had just changed their the date of their primary election. And he was saying, look, I need help. I've got to get the word out to voters. I've got to make certain they get the right information. We've got to make it clear. There could be some bad actors out there who put out disinformation with the wrong date or the wrong method of voting, or it could be people just repeating misinformation that somebody got it wrong. Somebody put up billboards in one state with the wrong date. So not deliberately, just misinformation. So with this level of change, which really hasn't happened in probably in American history, there's all this opportunity for confusion, and everybody now in state and local government take it very seriously because they see what's going on around them. It's state and local government, League of Women Voters, National Guard has a big role this year for the first time, because the scope of the problem is just so large.
you're describing, on the one hand, this enormous both logistical problem as we add mail, and also the fact that as we've gone to COVID and things change, or new software, there's all of that secretaries of state can manage. When you talk to secretaries of state about the disinformation and the foreign interference things, what are the local actions that either states can take or any of us can take when we're kind of on the receiving end of these vectors, usually on social media that we're in, and we're likely going to be part of the things that get compromised?
Well, we have a presentation on disinformation and misinformation as part of our workshops in each of the states. And two things. One is don't repeat something that might be too good to be true, because if it's too good to be true, it might not be. So take a second to just sit back and say, where is this coming from? Is this reliable? But the other thing is, and the federal government is moving more toward categorizing election security right in the same bucket with terrorism. If you see something, say something. If you see something in whether it's an email, social media, whatever, that is attacking a campaign or attacking a local election official, the best thing to do is to let that campaign know right away, because the faster they can take action against it. And if it's on social media, we actually, as part of our workshops, we talk about what Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft all do. They have 24/7 staffed units to take down false information. And what they want is to have campaigns and election officials letting them know as soon as it's discovered, so they can take it down quickly. Now, I think we've seen that a lot of the false information spreads more quickly than correct information, but that simply means there's that much more of a premium on taking action very, very quickly.
We've had Yael Eisenstadt on the show, who used to run election security for Facebook and famously left after 2016 when she thought they weren't really listening, and has gone on to be a key critic in this stuff. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that, right, the business models are there for engagement, and what engages is often the salacious stuff. Are you satisfied with the efforts that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram are taking to try to meter down this stuff, right? I mean, we've seen a move towards, even yesterday, they took down a tweet by the president in which he made up fake stuff about kids and COVID. But how much of this is something that the platforms need to do? How much of it is what we report, and where do we have the most influence in the, 3 months to go?
What we focus on, again, our audience is campaign and election officials. And so what we want to do is link them, and we've worked with the major platforms. We're platform and vendor agnostic. We work with everybody. What we see our role as doing is to try to make certain that all of them, all the platforms, are in complete and immediate contact with any campaign, any local election official, state election official, to make certain that communication is really is absolutely seamless. I think the platforms have a problem, and I've, no secret, I've talked about this with them and publicly and written about it, is, are they common carriers or are they publishers? They haven't really figured that out. They'd like to have the best of both. And in politics, we're seeing the real conflict there, because Mark Zuckerberg says, great, we should let anybody say anything. Well, maybe not. But as soon as you start down that path, then you're going to have people saying, oh, wait a minute, you're censoring conservatives, or you're censoring liberals. It's something which has not been resolved, I think, on the part of the platforms.
These days between, so you've basically said you're working with these secretaries of state, and the concern in terms of what people can do side is, if you see something that looks like a disinformation, report it to the campaign so they can assess it. And of course, sometimes this is difficult because a lot of the disinformation stuff looks pretty clever. As a Facebook or Twitter user, are are campaigns now implementing reporting things? Like when I'm on Twitter, I have a button to report something if it's violent or sexual or whatever. Well, is there some simple method that, like, if I'm looking at something and they're talking about my congressperson or Joe Biden or a ballot initiative and it looks funky, I can push a button and it goes into campaign review?
Well, the head of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee spoke in one of our workshops, two of our workshops, and he said they actually have a whole series of things that any candidate or any campaign should do before they announce. Because he said, as soon as you announce, right, or even before people know you're about to announce, you're going to be attacked. And so you better have all of these things in place before you're up and running. And that includes, having on, it's not speed dial, but the digital equivalent of speed dial, these 24/7 desks at the platforms. You'd better have those ready. You'd better have someone monitoring social media for you, because you don't want to suddenly discover that 6 hours ago somebody put something out which was totally false. Now, often you're talking about campaigns where the candidate's spouse or son may be the digital director, or maybe even the campaign manager. So you're talking about situations where there aren't a lot of resources. And in fact, that's a common refrain everywhere, even in at the state level. I don't think any state thinks they have enough resources to do what they would really like to do to secure election cybersecurity. And so it's a matter of, how much can you do with what you have. And in the case of some campaigns that are very thinly staffed, what we've started to tell people is that there are now, for federal House and Senate races, there is free assistance in this area, and the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, has ruled that it's not a campaign donation, so you can accept this assistance. That's a big help. That's free, and they make it available to anybody running a House or Senate campaign. And there are also people working with the presidential campaigns offering free help. But when you get down to state and local races, and these are places that may be, I'll give you an example. I think it was. You're kind of classically describing an asymmetrical warfare situation. Yes, absolutely.
Local race, and at the Internet Research Bureau, they've targeted a little town in North Dakota who didn't see it coming.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, the adversaries, the high-profile adversaries, especially Russia, they have R&D budgets. They have lots of people working on these, working as bad actors. And as the saying goes in Homeland Security, all they have to do is succeed once. And so, whereas we have to succeed many times. In fact, David Sanger calls it the perfect weapon, because using the internet to disrupt elections, to reduce faith in democracy, so it's really cheap. When I talked to him at that point, there were 30 countries hacking into the United States. And I said, why are they doing that? And he said, because it's cheap and it works. And I said, okay, give me an idea of what the country number 30 is. And he said, Bangladesh. Bangladesh? Why? He said, Adam, all you have to do is hire a couple of guys in Ukraine. They'll do it for you. I said, but what are they after? What do they want? He said, oh, they might want to know how the Bangladesh diaspora is voting in the United States, what they're doing, what they're up to. And he said, it's incredibly cheap and incredibly easy. Well, you take a deep breath after that,
Yeah. We need to wrap this up. We'd love to have you back on before the election. Is there a place where we can go and look at a little bit of kind of the syllabus, or what you're suggesting to states? How do people follow this and learn?
Yes, you go to our election, to our website, and we have all of the resources there that we can share publicly. There's some that we can only share privately, but all the public resources are at www.electionsecurity.usc.edu. And in fact, anybody who wants to come to our workshops, unlike our private sessions for the states, these are open to the public. So you come to our website, www.electionsecurity.usc.edu, click on workshops, and you can sign up for them. We do them Tuesdays and Thursdays.
And so they're in different states, but I may be in California, and if you happen to be going to New Jersey, I can go to that one?
Absolutely. New Jersey is next Thursday. And in each state, we have 3 basic presentations from USC: cybersecurity and cyber safety, disinformation and misinformation, and preparing for the bad thing that might happen to you, crisis communication. But we also have anywhere from 5 to 10 speakers in that state, beginning with a statewide elected official. And you mentioned New Jersey. We're going to have the head of the Eagleton Institute at Rutgers, who's a big cybersecurity guy. So he'll be one of our speakers, as well as state officials. Same thing in North Carolina on Tuesday. So it's really been an education for us going from state to state, because the states are all different. They do elections differently.
I was just going to say, this is such a rich topic. I'd love to continue this, and maybe we should almost do one of our quarantine shows as a mock or kind of a version of a workshop. Maybe we'll even have some people in there who can, act like the red team, like in other words, have people, how would they pose an attack? And we'll just talk about what can happen here, because part of this is just learning what, so many people are doing online games and they're doing these attack things. We live in a giant simulation called an election system that can be corrupted. And we've got to take care of that as our democracy.
Yep.
Thank you, Adam Powell, and we will continue this.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, welcome back, Mickey and Jim. The big takeaway from that is this is quite an ongoing endeavor, because securing our elections is not just securing the ballot and the vote, it's our minds. And the nature of this attack vector came on relatively quickly in our democracy. And Adam was telling me that
Peter, he said 70 countries, 70 countries are hacking us, 70, and there's this point of even franchising, paying US citizens who sort of unwittingly potentially post messages to either disrupt or lower confidence in democracy, the idea of democracy. And I think the other thing, I took a lot of notes. If you look on the quarantine whiteboard, I'm trying to keep track of everything he talked about. But his point in asymmetric warfare was that all you need to do from an asymmetric warfare standpoint is succeed once, right? So the barrier for being illegal, for being bad actors, is actually very low. You just have to succeed once, blow up a town, blow up something, or in this case, undermine elections for a generation, and then you don't have to worry about it because they're not going to believe in it anyway, and they'll just give up. And whereas if you're actually a free country and you actually care about things and you care about the rule of law and you care about those things, you have to succeed every single time. So this is very much that asymmetric warfare approach. It was really chilling, actually, also to hear, obviously every state is different, but in some local elections, it's the kid who's the social media manager for his dad or mom, or it's the spouse who's actually doing this. Like, how do they know what to do? And this notion, be ready the minute you announce that you're running or something like that, and that there is no, it's unbelievable that this is effectively cyber terrorism. Very powerful stuff. And we put up the USC cybersecurity link. I think it's definitely worth having Adam back. I think that would be amazing to do a little bit of a mini workshop with him. Jim, what was your sort of reaction to Adam's interview?
Well, general fear of how easy it is to attack our country. I mean, just go into your local polling place, and it's like the 50s. But I'm just curious. Did he say anything maybe off camera? Which states don't have paper ballots anymore? Like, how ugly is it? And I do like the fact that we're decentralized because it's harder to attack. But did he mention anything about the most vulnerable states?
Well, of course, he mentioned this interesting point about New Hampshire that's back in the 40s, so no problem at all. The New York Times had a very interesting. They have a podcast called The Daily, and we'll post the link to that. In fact, Mohib, if you go into our Quip file, I think I have a bunch of links, and you could put some in here. But they had 2 days ago, they did one on election preparation. The big issue they uncovered is that states have to run voting in polling places and mail-in voting at the same time. Each one is logistically like running an election, and gearing up to do both stresses resources that they don't have, much less volunteers and people who won't turn out because they're worried about getting sick. So this is the case of really stressing a system. Even before you get to the bad actors, it's tough enough. We did talk off camera about the fact that you have presidential leadership that worried that it might lose, or that it wants to cast aspersions on mail-in ballots, is creating a situation where it would like to propagate the notion that the election won't be great. And I think he mentioned, I don't know who was on this or when
maybe we shouldn't have an election. Maybe why do we even have elections, Peter? Maybe this year we should just cancel the elections.
Well, that's right.
Maybe actually, for the next 5 years we should just have, just whoever's in power now just stays in power for the next 5 years. Because I wonder, so let's just cancel the elections entirely. That just seems like, let's just all go home.
Well, and of course, was it Russia that postponed elections for a year after this? But anyway, so the takeaway from this, when President Trump talks about the fact that this could be a messy or unfair, or you won't believe in an election, your first response is, "Oh, he's making that up." If you study it, actually, there's a whole lot that has to go right that we're not really prepared for, because we're running two different kinds of elections. The personnel may not be available to go do it. There's whatever is going on with the Postal Service that would appear to be affecting it. There's this whole thing that we talked about at the top of the hour with Nico, which is we're really distracted right now.
And wait, just for a second, before you go into the Postal Service, before you go to Nico, the Postal Service thing, I mean, as of the Sunday New York Times, they were talking about how the Trump administration was looking at closing rural various post offices with 2 weeks notice to basically close them. And then if you want to go vote by mail, you can't, because the post office is gone. Now, it seems like they've rolled back a little bit on that, but this is a pretty serious thing. Like, okay, wait a second. Our top FBI agent, Bill Barr, has voted by mail. Trump has voted by mail. Most of the military has voted by mail because they're overseas. Certain states like Hawaii have voted by mail for a number of years, and opening that question of, well, yeah, no, it would actually be really hard to vote by mail, is very worrying in some ways, because of the checks and balances. Even if it takes a long time, even if New York takes a long time to count the ballots, maybe we should just appreciate that it takes longer, and it's a lot more expensive to hack by mail for Russia, as an example of a state actor who's tried it out and has been testing.
Can I add a nuance?
So it's just a weird thing that we're questioning voting by mail.
Well, Mick, I think the other nuance here is the system prep for vote by mail. So, for example, I have a permanent absentee ballot in California because I travel a lot. And so it's a routine, right? I expect the voter pamphlet to come in. When I register for the driver's license, I know the ballot's coming. They know who I am. I send it back. If you suddenly go from not a lot of vote by mail to 70% vote by mail, what do? So I think Georgia or one of the states, they mailed everybody a letter. Would you like to vote by mail? Well, the response for the people who then registered to vote by mail wasn't that great, because how many people actually look at stuff? One of the other states simply for the primary.
How many looks at people in your mailbox? Yeah.
Right. One of the other states did not do that. They simply sent everybody that was registered a mail-in ballot and got a better response. We're talking about maybe a 50% swing. And there are a number of issues there because actually going from no voting by mail to voting by mail, operationally, it's a lot to just get right, and stuff falls through the cracks. So this does point out that perhaps, and by the way, voting by mail, you're actually
isn't historically, I just want to ask a question here, Peter. You probably know this better than I, but I used to think that vote by mail was only used for runoffs. Like if there was a disproportionate number of actual people voting, you don't even open up the ballot. What's the point in looking at the mail? Because so much of the country, Nebraska went from 25% mail-in to 75% mail-in, Adam mentioned. That's a massive swing. And you can't assume that the systems that were put in place for sort of close call elections, which maybe historically, I don't know, was mail-in normally for close calls, suddenly is the dominant approach.
What we invested in for corner cases.
Can we bring Mohib in for a second, by the way, to add? Mohib, can you join us in this discussion? You're coming in from Arizona. And part of the reason I want to put you on the spot is because you made a comment about something called DEF CON.
Yes. So this weekend, starting from yesterday through to Sunday, DEF CON, which is the world's largest hacking convention, is going into DEF CON safe mode. So it's all virtual. There's a number of talks and events. All the talks that would normally happen through each day have already been pre-released, all online. All the hacking villages have gone virtual. So in the past, I brought it up because in the past, DEF CON has what's called a voting election hacking village. So that's where they would bring out actual real voting machines, that the same models that are used out in the election today, and let people experiment and play with them. I mean, there was a case where an 11-year-old kid was able to hack a machine just in a few minutes. They are horrendously insecure. And DEF CON tried to bring attention to that.
It's not even hacking anymore, isn't it? It's really just like download the passwords and go do it.
Yeah, actually at Hackers on Planet Earth, the Hope Conference in New York 2 years ago, there was a talk, and I cannot for the life of me remember by whom, and it was on how to hack these voting machines. And it was literally just go online and search for the default password. You can find it in all the PDFs and documentation, and most places don't change that information. So you can just go.
Is it fair to say, I mean, Mohib, from your perspective, is voting by mail safer than voting with a debulbed election machine, whatever, or one of the ones that's been hacked by 12-year-olds?
So at this point, it's a matter of what you trust. I do believe mail-in voting is secure in that, like, it is packaged and it's going. The only place where that could be maliciously altered is if somebody working in the mail departments had the goal of doing that. And I think it's been proven time and time again that as far as postal services go, there is integrity there. Yeah. I've never once in my life had a package that was.
It would also cost a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be an obscene thing to imagine. Because here's the thing: the idea is that if we're being hacked by a foreign nation, like if we're being hacked by Russia, for example, then that is something they have to do from the outside. For them to be able to hack the postal service and that has them becoming insecure would mean that they have to physically be here, have foot soldiers all over doing that. Whereas with the election machines, if they were going to hack anything, it would be those election machines. And honestly, I don't even think they are doing anything with that. Because if you look at what you can do once you are into them, it would be a lot of effort to try to.
Adam made the point that if you were an adversary, there was a lot more benefit in disinformation or voter suppression than actually
just
trying
cheaper.
To votes in 10,000 places.
Yeah, I mean, Russia has shown us that their tactic is social engineering. It's not actual hacking. It's hacking it feels like, to show that they have the presence. But again, it's all misinformation. As far as mailing goes, I think that works better than anything. If we're going to look at who's really undermining it, I think it's
well. There you
clear.
Go, Jim. It's down to you and a content
Facebook.
team.
Jim, I wanted to ask you a question that was posed.
Go ahead.
Just a thought. Jocelyn Yu, who's our intern, actually posted a comment. How can students be more sustainably, consciously, and effectively engaged in driving social change in our day-to-day lives and through activism? And I just think you've done this for a long time. How would you respond to Jocelyn? She's a college kid and she wants to be more involved. She's an intern with us. How can we be more effective in these kinds of things? What are some tricks you've learned?
So yeah, Jocelyn, thank you. And absolutely. This is your future. This is your planet. And we have to save it. We have to save the democracy. We have to save the environment. We have to overturn dirty things like Citizens United so that we can continually do these things. So in the earlier segment, we were talking about how people aren't getting the news anymore, or your friends just haven't heard what to do, how to do, when the deadlines are. So what we're trying to do as a group that has done a lot of decentralized community building is find the leaders, find the nodes, and get people active. And God bless the TikTok kids who screwed up Trump's terrible event. I mean, when we, typically when we're saying we're getting together an activism group, like 18 to 35 is our focus. No, 16, 15. Yeah, some of these kids, like, even though they're not allowed to vote, and we should drop the voting age, by the way, hopefully there's enough of a win in POTUS and the Senate so we can get some of these things done. But really, the voting age should be younger, because that it's their future. And all of these, the fact that the people on Social Security and the elder population are voting for like environmental change, which they won't be around for, is a problem. So, Jocelyn, organizing your friends and, quite frankly, getting involved in disseminating factual, science-based, historically accurate data to people that maybe are getting their news from propaganda sources would be great.
Hey, Mohib, I've got a question. What's your take on TikTok? I mean, obviously, there's been some exposés from the hacker community about how it sort of tracks 10 times more stuff because it's effectively bought and paid for by the Chinese government. What's your belief about this? Is this actually going to help the next generation, or are they going to basically become anesthetized to it because everybody is basically co-opting them? Like, what's your take from the sort of tech side of things?
I mean, here's the reality. We, as a whole, the world looks at TikTok as this big, gaping, unique, big security hole that is very malicious because it's owned by a Chinese company, which is then under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party. But at the same time, you look at the apps that come from here, they're just as bad. And I would say Apple has failed in this part too, where they let an app that's that insecure get through. I've developed apps before that. So when I was working in IoT, we once made an app that you had to give it every permission, because the idea was it was an app that lets you connect to all the interfaces on your phone. But this was for experimentation and play. The fact that we got that through still blows my mind, but it went through a number of review processes where they have somebody look at the video. So the fact that TikTok made it through, and it has, and I have to verify more because I've read a few different articles that say different things. The features that it takes on your phone are absurd. What it's doing is bananas, if those are true. So that's more of it's a general problem. I mean, we could look at it, because point A, the chain of command of who has access to it. Now a foreign country has access to all American citizens' data. That is horrible, but we've also had WeChat forever. But what Trump's doing by banning it and banning Tencent is they're also affecting all the properties that get money from Tencent. So Riot Games is actually hugely affected. So the whole gaming community is freaking out about this. Which is interesting, because now you have people who might not have actually cared about politics suddenly having a concern. But I think there's a larger issue of what it means principally when you ban technology. I don't like that on principle. I don't like the insecurity of the app either. I think there's a better way to solve this, and I think that starts with the marketplaces.
I agree with you. But also the notion that any technology that has had to become mature anything in nature that has had to become mature has had regulation, right? I mean, just if you use all the sugar in the world, you die. If you know, like every plant, every animal has regulation. An engine has a regulator, otherwise it would explode. You know, and so it does feel that there's this belief that this tech community can regulate itself. Maybe that's a whole separate episode. But it also feels like, let's be serious. I mean, you know, if you use a drone made in another country, particularly a country that's very low cost and doesn't have, you know, rule of law, property rights, or care about the citizens building those drones. I've got one of those. When one of those drones flew over the White House, they basically said, "Oh, we'll just push an over-the-air update and make the White House invisible." And the next morning, everybody's prosumer drone, the biggest drone company in the world, suddenly didn't see the White House anymore. Now that feels really scary, you know, like that you could just decide what is visible to every American tomorrow by hitting an over-the-air update button. So, I mean, there is a certain, like, it's time to grow up when it comes to the tech community. Hey, Jim, just as a non sequitur,
I just wanted to add to that.
Maybe Mohib, you've got insight. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to point to that. So I think it's not so much regulation that's needed as much as a pressure on everybody who the consumers buy from to be more transparent. Apple needs to be more transparent. Android needs to be more transparent. You know, tech companies, we do our best to make things secure. And when it comes, when there ends up being these kind of holes, it's the consumer just doesn't know that. And there's all these things that you find out later. Oh, Facebook is collecting this data. This website's collected this data. It's totally illegal. They meant nothing malicious about it, but they did it, and it ended up being malicious. And that's because there's no transparency law, I think. So that's just something I think it should be more about making that forced as opposed to banning things or controlling how things are done. It's a matter of, what are you doing? All right, am I okay with this? Cool, maybe not.
Well, I think even you know, we've talked about this in the past, and I did some research around having an FDA for cognition, right? So when I pick up a can of orange juice, it says how much sodium, how much aluminum, you know, how many bug parts are in the can of orange juice. You know, there's an FDA, there's an EPA for all the other ways that you can destroy or strip mine our natural resources, but there's nothing for strip mining our brain. When I pick up Google, you know, in California, you know, nobody protects my own brain from, hey, this will habituate short attention spans. This will reduce my ability to make ethical decisions if I use it for more than 10 minutes. You know, all those, 192 behavioral hacks that are documented in Wikipedia that are just the basic biases that are being exploited as dark design patterns by the Facebooks of the world and others, you know, evil by design patterns, they call them. It also feels like and I don't mean stop me from having an app that destroys my cognition. I just mean flag it so that if people don't want to drink this orange juice that's filled with bug bodies, they can like see that it's filled with bug bodies, which goes to your transparency point. Let the market decide. If you just want to destroy your brain, do it. But I do think that a regulatory body that insists on plain language, even, you know, consent. When you click on Facebook, do you really realize, or Samsung TVs, do you really realize that they say that please don't say anything in your living room that you might worry because we're going to sell it to third parties? That's actually in the click-through when you start a normal Samsung TV now, because they haven't decided who they're going to sell the data to.
And when Adam was speaking to us, he was like, if you see something as disinformation, please report it. But that's like humans trying to keep up with bots. And there's probably several orders of magnitude where that's...
Why are we putting the onus on the end user? Yeah.
And what this conversation reinforces is certainly the one that we had with Yael and others, which are the mechanisms that can learn about us, mess with us, change us, are happening at scale, and they're coming on much faster than we expected. And I thought the comment about the Hutchins Commission that went on during the Roosevelt administration, where the head of Time magazine understood the power of mass media, asked an independent body to tell him what to do, a Self-Regulation Act, probably as much just out of doing good as worrying that Congress might come after him, though I'm not sure about that, was, that was a great act of trying to put some regulation in it. The the Communications Act of 1934 put that mechanism in. And certainly in that era, the new media were exploited. I mean, Hitler used the new medium of radio perfectly, understood how to whip people up. That's why McLuhan called it a hot medium. Goebbels understood the feedback loop there. And, we had people in this country like Father Coughlin that were using it against us. And, we were fortunate from a democratic point of view that Roosevelt used it differently. The democracy was differently. We enter this moment of scale, and these tools are in private hands, and we're barely learning about them. And talk about a case of changing the wings and flying the airplane, or changing the tire while it's on the car. My big takeaway from this is that we thought the 2016 election was when we didn't know what was going on. We had to go fix it. But it's an even bigger scale thing now, because you throw the pandemic into it and the greater influence of this and national leadership that's not so interested in helping. I get that this is a long-term issue. And Jim, to your point, and to Nico's, we probably only get out of this with a lot of attention and eyes on this. Civics.
Absolutely. Sunlight. And in the evolution of media, I'll add that in 2016, we elected an expert internet troll. And trolling is an art form. And how to get under people's skin, and then especially in environments where there are people that believe things they hear or people are saying, or the truthiness factor. Oh, that sounds about right, I believe it. When half the population is susceptible to that, and then they're getting hit with a Fox News, which seems like should be legit. It's like, it's on the dial. How do we push back against this structural change that sort of snuck up on us, but all of a sudden took everything over? And I think really the answer is fast legislation while the votes are there to lock this down. And I'm as much.
What would you lock down?
So I'm as much interested in the Senate flipping as I am POTUS. Obviously, if POTUS doesn't flip, we're in
what
bigger.
Would you have them legislate?
So, I'm not an attorney, but just the fact that an organization like a Fox News can freely traffic in propaganda and journalistic integrity. I'm not sure there's an answer, because there's free speech, but there's also journalistic integrity, access to daily briefings, and things like that. Once upon a time, there was some guardrails.
Fairness doctrine was in place. Equal time was in place. We regulated broadcast and required you to do certain things, and your license came up for renewal, and you were held to some standard. And in the world of deregulation, we've thrown a lot of that out.
Journalistic integrity. And then we got away from Walter Cronkite, and these are the absolute facts, even the ones you don't want to hear, because it was all about making the bucks. And if you told people some bummer stuff that's happening in Africa, they're going to turn off the channel. So I don't know how to get back to that, but it seems like some regulations, especially with social media and truth and real truth, not truthiness, there's definitely some thinking that can go on there.
If I had a comment to that,
Jim, you just made me think of something. Jon Stewart had an article or an interview in the New York Times a few weeks ago where he basically said, and it relates to your internet troll comment about Trump, he basically said that Trump is a white hat hacker. He was brought in to basically try everything he could to show the exploits of our current set of laws and regulations. And he's done a pretty good job of it. Abraham Lincoln said, if you want a bad law repealed, enforce it vigorously so that you can actually see the limits of the law. And it's depressing. And, when Jon Stewart said that, I was just like, oh, gosh, probably right. Trump should be keynoting DEF CON this weekend. But as the internet troll, sort of white hat hacker, No, of course he didn't. But I mean, this notion that we are the canary in the coal mine. The United States might happen to be a cute something for everyone to stand back and watch if you're in Europe or if you're in other countries that think they have a democracy, but it's coming for them next. You know, if we actually don't want despots and dictators, and I don't know, maybe enlightened dictatorship is the secret for the future, but let's say we don't want that. It sounds like we better figure this out. And one last question that I noticed Agnieszka asked in the comments was, Jim, you mentioned that you think voting age should be moved to younger. Tell me about that. Say something, just a little, like, what are you thinking?
So kids are pretty smart, and it's their world. The future of our planet is they'll be around for it longer. So, for example, environmentalism, it just kills me that senior citizens vote in much higher percentages, and we're not teaching civics in school anymore. So if kids voted, there would be more interest in civics. And it just also surprises me. I walk through a high school to vote. That's where my polling place is. It's in a high school. I'm walking by kids that aren't voting. Yeah. I'm in their house. So this would be just a great thing to have at a high school level, would be for kids to understand what the game is, and then really understand not just who the national candidates are. In 2021, practically all of New York City government flips, and that's going to be a real exciting set of changes here in New York. So, I mean, that's some compelling classroom drama there if the kids had a reason to care.
I'd love to, as we wrap up, I want to just bring that back to the original comment that led to this episode. As I was talking to friends of mine, they weren't in high school. They were in their 20s. They were clearly of voting age. It was not clear to them why it mattered, right? They felt either the system was hijacked, it didn't matter, somebody else was messing with it, all of those arguments. And, you know, as Nico pointed out, if you're not participating, it isn't happening. It isn't some giant national mess. Your precinct isn't that big. But that's not really communicating. And the amazing disparity here to me is we live at this moment where there's an awful lot of cognitive capacity on the sideline. A lot of people aren't working full-time, capable people. And this is exactly the moment that those very same young people who feel disenfranchised have the capacity to do everything we talked about today, to enroll, to participate locally, to get their friends to figure out how to get their mail-in ballots, all of the stuff. If that connection's made, not only do you have a better election, but that's civics. Civics is a verb, right? It's not a thing you study, it's a thing you do. And certainly in the 90 days till the election, and getting more people of any party or persuasion engaged, is what makes it look like a real election, right? If lots of people are engaged and they felt like they got counted, no matter how it turns out, that's good. If people are like, that washed around me, okay, that's not so good. So, I think the place to come out on this is, and we should just post this, what are the sets of things that people can do in their free time to get people registered and to work on this? Like
in their local community.
Yeah.
And on that, I will put out a sort of a last pitch here. Please get in touch with me at jimglazer@gmail.com. We're looking for brilliant content creators, as simple as memes or illustrators or video folks that can turn things around quickly, and content disseminators, people that have a lot of followers or just have family members in swing districts. And that doesn't necessarily mean red or blue states, but there's a lot of districts where Congress people are up. So we're building this network. And since our media system is broken, it has to be word of mouth through friends and family. And we're in this for the long haul because it's our country and we've come so close to the edge. It's now time to really fight back.
Jim, you asked a moment ago why we can't bring Walter Cronkite back. I'd just like to wrap the show up and point out that America is now at a crossroads. What we've heard this hour is that the democracy is ours and one to contend with. And so when we go into this, the 21st century, each of us must take this American democracy as our own, participate, and be part of it. I'm not Walter Cronkite, but it's 5:55 Pacific Quorum Time. Join us again, because that's the way it is.
Yay, Walter. We miss you, Walter.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I will return from Walter Cronkite to
Thanks,
myself.
Peter.
See you. By the way, Wednesday is a run, and we will be back. Hey, Mickey, what's coming up?
Walter Cronkite.
Coming up?
Actually, what's interesting is maybe August is the first month that we have a whole bunch of shows lined up. So we're going to have Terry Irwin, who's leading a brand new initiative, a new center at Carnegie Mellon. And her initiative is around transition design. So social, technical, political systems in transition. And it's a massive new effort to say, look, this is a complex system problem, and you need to be able to reach the real stakeholders in that mission. So Terry and Dutch McDonald, a partner of mine from back at Maya when I ran Maya, he now runs Maya for BCG, and he is an architect by training. His former career was working with the partner from Frank Gehry Associates, who helped build Bow and things like that. And so Dutch and Terry are going to be on. We're also going to have a school teacher edition where we've got two school teachers that are going to talk about preparing for back to school. And then we've also got a student edition. So Jocelyn and Kara, so a high school student and a college student, both interns for us, are going to actually talk about what they care about in their generation. Back to Jim's point, how do we be good ancestors? How do we actually invite the next group in? And then we're going to have Kay Foster, who is just an amazing advocate, board member, impassioned executive coach who works locally for nonprofits, but also works in the biology area, synthetic biology. She used to be a leader at Johnson & Johnson. And Ayşe Bursel, Turkish industrial designer, who built the Design the Life You Love initiative and has been looking at how elder care works and how come their products suck. And yet they still want the same things that 20-somethings want: love, friendship, engagement. And how do we help think about that? So they're going to be on. We've got a whole bunch of people coming up. Pretty exciting August, moving into September.
An action-packed season on Quarantine. Jim, Jocelyn, Mickey, Mohib, thank you all. It is now 5:58 Pacific Quarantine. Have a great weekend.
Let's get close, but not so close. We can share from a distance. We want to see each other. We'll have to stay in your quarantine space while we talk.